I told her before we started, this is a complete dream come true. She has been running for president. She's an incredible author. I mean, how many books, Marianne Williamson, have you written? Over a dozen.
Oh yeah, 16. It just says
16.
I'm old, Sarah. Just says I've been around a long time. That's all it
Marianne,
means.
Marianne, I told you this. I can only hope to have a life and career that you have. What you have done for women like myself and the
Thank you.
consciousness of this country, you are beyond a patriot. I just admire you in every sense of the word.
Thank you so much. Really an honor to hear you say those things. Thank you.
We're going to talk about your new book, but I was curious. A Woman's Worth, I love that book, changed my life. And the book, the essence of the book is really for women to go inward, to kind of have that spiritual journey, find their confidence, do the healing, and almost realize that society is always going to judge us. You wrote that book in the early 90s. I'm wondering, Marianne, how are women doing today? Did we get your message?
Well, it's interesting because when I wrote that book, it it was because I just turned 40. And it was what I felt I had come to understand at 40. Then I realized that it started to have a kind of cult following among women in their 20s because women are getting much earlier to where we got a little bit later. So the message of going within, of the patriarchal prejudice, of what goddess means, all those issues, I think are now firmly grounded within the culture. So that is different. At the time, that book was saying something sort of different. I mean, there were really the profound writers like Jean Shinoda Bolen talking about the goddesses, et cetera. But in terms of the contemporary female experience, et cetera, now when you say, have we gotten the message? We've all gotten the message at this point about all the spiritual principles. At this point, we've all read the same books. We've all listened to the same tapes. So whether it has to do with women, whether it has to do with forgiveness, whether it has to do with all that stuff, it's not at this point about more accumulation of data or analysis. It's about application and it's about courage. So have we gotten the message? Well, listen, this applies to me as much as to anyone else. Intellectually, I've gotten the message. We've all gotten the message. The issue is the work that it takes living our lives. And I think
Mm.
for me, I've really been shaken over the last year on this issue of how women are treated by the patriarchy. Because when I wrote that book, I had never really experienced the viciousness of patriarchy. I never felt in my career as an author or a spiritual speaker or anything like that, I never felt the arrows of misogyny. I never felt that my opportunities were limited because of my being a woman. I never felt that other people's perception of me was skewed because I'm a woman. Running for president was a completely different experience. So when you say have women gotten the message, I think a lot of women have, but they sure haven't in the realm of politics. I'll tell you that much.
How did you experience the patriarchy with
In
with
terms of
with
running for
running for?
president,
Yeah, yeah. How was it another level? Because I can only imagine. Oh my God. I mean,
things would be said about me that would never say about a man. Something in my campaign would be described in a way they would never do about a man. Smears, trashing, character assassination. If something happened in a man's campaign, it's described one way, happens in mine, described another way. Just a complete lack of respect that I don't think would be so easily accorded to a man. Like I said, I had never experienced that before, really. I that had not been my experience in other sectors.
I've listened to so many interviews that you've done, when you were running for president with as an author, spiritual advisor. And I'm wondering, you have such great ideas for this country. It took a lot of courage to run for president
Thank you.
twice. Twice.
Yeah.
I mean, as a woman, we've elected a man of color in this country. I mean, when do you think we will elect a female president?
Well, what I have come to believe is that if it's just a matter of plumbing, then the country's already ready. But will we elect someone who truly stands up for the kind of paradigm shift into not, Germaine Greer said the opposite of patriarchy is not matriarchy, but fraternity.
Mm,
So to me, feminist values are just values of balance, of a sense of nourishing of people and planet that comes before um, any other value, such as economic values, top-down economic values. It means putting children first.
mm.
It means putting the earth first. The earth, it is our shared home. That, I think, is where the resistance lies. So if a woman toes the line, like this society has no problem allowing itself to love women who are towing the line with the patriarchal vision. And many are. When I talked about my being trashed as a woman running for president, many of the women people who did the trashing were women. We know that. So many of us internalized, the oppression. So is the society ready? Sarah, for me, and this is not just on this topic, this is on so many things. My having run for president twice leaves me with a deep, deep feeling that the American people are not the problem. We're a decent people, no better than anyone else, but no worse. There's so much decency out there, so much intelligence out there, so much nobility ready to be harnessed. The problem is we have a political and media industrial complex, as I call it, that sits like a fist on top of the real expression of people's better angels. Instead of facilitating and really being a conduit for the best within us, it manipulates and engineers. So when you say, when will we be ready? Well, look, even in my running, when I ran last time, I had a CNN town hall. I was on CNN fairly often. I was on MSNBC fairly often. You can't be a candidate for president in the United States, not be on those programs and enough people even know you're there. So it's not just when will the people, it's like when will the gatekeepers
Yeah.
allow the people to really see what their options are. And a woman who truly stands up for what you and I would see as feminine values is by definition a challenge to the prevailing economic system, really. I mean, to me, it would be a feminine value to say that there should not be carcinogens in our food because we're feeding our children. Hello. That very view is a challenge to the profit-making bottom line of the big food companies. There are all kinds of carcinogens in the food in the United States that are not allowed in Canada or in other European countries. To me, it would be a feminine value to say everybody should have health care. It should be a feminine value to say we should help people get education. And in other advanced democracies, they do. They are accorded those things. And I think also, the system is so corrupt, Sarah, and I heard you say you lived in DC, so I have a feeling you know a lot of what I'm talking about. It's a hard place for a soft heart. It's so dirty. It's gangster, actually. It's mafia-like to play in that game. And I understand not just women, but any really empathetic, tender heart saying, I don't want anything to do with it, but we can't afford. We have to go there and we have to transform it.
Talk to me more about the food industry. One of the things I like and resonates so much with me is when you go on other podcasts and shows and you talk about how corrupt our food industry is. We're seeing it with this bird flu outbreak. I mean, the farmers don't want to test. We know the
And
FDA, yeah, the
yes, the
FDA.
government has actually denied itself the right to go in there. This all started with Ronald Reagan. The government, there has been such corporate capture of our agencies at the FDA, literally, like you just said, and I hope you say that all the time. The
I gotta say it
government's,
more. I'm getting my courage,
okay,
getting my courage.
please, the
This
government surrendered its ability. That's what corporate lobbying does. The government surrendered its own ability. The government should be there to advocate for the people. And it surrendered its own ability to go in there and test. And you're right, the more you read about this bird flu stuff, and the government, you'd like to think you live in a country and say, well, the government will do what it needs to do to make sure. Well, it can't, because the big food companies, and in that case, big agriculture, animal factory farming, all of that, it's one of the most corrupt, one of the most dangerous, and one of the most disease producing sectors of our society, and all because corporate profits are put before the safety, health, and well-being of the American people and our animals and our earth.
All right. So, what do we actually do, Marianne, to change this? Because it almost feels for me overwhelming. Like how these big farm groups that are now have USDA, FDA. They really control, what they're doing. It's like, how do we, as the people, really actually change it?
When you see a person running on these things, send $5.
Mm.
When you see a person running on these things, get involved and know what the game is. What happens, and this is not just about me, it's about anyone talking about these things. They will put fairy dust in people's eyes. Oh, don't look there. That person's not qualified. That person's kooky. That person's kind of crazy. You can't listen to her. She's not serious. Now, this is interesting because to me, this is what's serious. So I always loved that one. They said I was unserious because they knew how serious I was, because I was talking about things like this. But you have to look at who's running. You have to get involved in the primaries, not just the general, whether it's Senate, House. You have to get involved certainly outside as well as inside, nonprofits, but you can't leave electoral politics out of it. But grow up. That's my message to a lot of people.
Mm.
Grow up and know the games they play. Stop being so easily, like in my case, well, I hear she's, I don't know. I don't know if I like her. That stuff, you wouldn't even, conversations that they would not even be having about a man. So, what can we do? Whatever's in front of you,
Yeah.
whatever's in front of you.
I mean, what do you make? I mean, you've spent your life writing for women, and now we have Ozempic, which I've been an advocate for the body positivity movement for the past 5 years. It feels defeating. I'm sure you've been there many times in your career, because now it's like no one cares about body positivity. It's like, well, how do I get Ozempic? I just want it, and I'm always like, our society just it always comes back to they want to be thin and young, But I mean, when you see things like Ozempic now, what's your overall take of that? Because again, we're not addressing why people are overweight in this country. It's like, and now they want to give it to children. I mean, we never
Oh,
say,
I had not heard that one.
"Oh yes,
I,
that's a big push that's coming." I mean, this is like to me. I yell out to people. I know you can relate and you feel like you're not getting through to anybody. But I mean, it's like women don't even want to look at why are we 50, 60 pounds more obese than we were 50 years ago? Nobody cares about that. They just want the shot. That's how.
well, first of all, I don't assume that nobody cares about that. That's not my assumption. It's not my assumption as a candidate. I think a lot of times we say people don't care or people are apathetic. I think people are processing what's happening. I think people just can't believe it. Because we were brought up, we're realizing, oh my God, it was all a delusion. Because I know I grew up in an America in which there was more than not institutional structures which were designed and which were somewhat effective at trying to protect the safety, health, and well-being of the American people. This craziness where corporate profits is what matters no matter what, which would include the kinds of things in our food that actually lead to obesity, et cetera. This really came on full blown like in the 1980s. So I think people do care, Sarah. I think in too many cases, especially if you are disconnected from any sense of real political transformation. And then if you see how corrupt that system is, people just kind of don't know what to do.
Mm.
So on the Ozempic thing, I notice I'm just sitting back listening to people. I've also, I have one friend who has really struggled with her weight. She's talked about some very positive results somebody got. I'm not in a judgmental mood about it. I'm not in a judgmental place about it. It's not for me to judge. I'm concerned because I'm reading more stuff that has to do with health effects. I'm concerned when I read about people with diabetes who really need the insulin and it's becoming a challenge for them. So when you say, what do I think about it? I'm observing.
Yeah.
I'm observing, and I think it's an individual choice.
And I think that's great. And actually, I should probably take that point of view more. I think it's just, you get a little discouraged. I get discouraged because it just seems like we continue to make our own society sick and we just get
You're
another
right.
for it.
Yeah, well, one of the things you're saying, I talked about on my campaign all the time, we have to look beyond the symptoms to root causes. And so I think you're absolutely correct. What is the cause of obesity in our society? What is leading to so much anxiety? What is leading to so much depression? What is leading to so much um, of the carcinogens in the food, et cetera? One day I was scrolling and it was, I don't know if it was TikTok or Instagram or whatever, but somebody said something so interesting. It was a picture of people walking down the street, a lot of people walking on the street, I think of Manhattan, or some big city, Manhattan, Chicago, someplace, in, it looked like maybe the 1940s. And what was written underneath it was, look how thin everybody was.
Mm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What were we doing at that time in our lives? Including things like we talk about all the time. Before dinner, kids would go out and play in the front yard
Yeah.
and do basketball hoops, run around the block. So I think there's so much to look at, and less judgment, more understanding is what's going to get us where we need to go.
You've spent the past 5 years or so running for president, being in this game. Why are we at a place where Republicans and Democrats, both parties, appeal to the fringes and almost seem like more and more they appeal to the fringes of society, the most extreme voices? Why is that?
I'm not so sure that they do. I think it's the media that shows those because that's sensational and that will get more clicks and more viewership. I think that the real political dichotomy in this country is not left versus right. It's powerful versus powerless. It's those who have money and greater access to money versus those who are struggling to get by. In 1996, there was something called the Telecommunications Act, which led to the consolidation of media. I'm sure you're very aware of this with the work you did in DC. A few corporations own, when I was growing up, we didn't even have this term mainstream media. And they're not going to talk about that real dichotomy because they're owned by the corporate matrix, whether it's telecommunications companies, political parties, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, big food companies that you and I have been talking about, big agriculture, big chemical, gun manufacturers, big oil, and defense contractors. They're an aristocracy in this country, no different than the landed gentry in Old England. And the social contract in those old societies was that the king and the queen and the aristocracy were entitled to the land, to the resources, and to wealth and wealth creation opportunities. This country was founded to repudiate that, but we need to repudiate it again. And all of this stuff about, oh, look what they're doing, is a kind of ruse. We're being manipulated. Because if you actually, like, I'm definitely a left wing, I'm on the left, okay? I have friends who are not. and they're not crazy people. And they're nice people, and they're good people. And hopefully we learn from each other. I was with a friend, couple the other night. I just don't think even, I always learn a lot on airplanes because you're
Yeah.
talking to people that you wouldn't necessarily be talking to under other circumstances. They don't know anything about you. They're not making assumptions because they don't know you. And when you actually talk to people, the American people are not, there is a core. We just need to reclaim it.
I love when you say that because I agree with you. I have conversations with people all the time, and you always find middle ground with almost, yes, you run into a few people that are really extreme, but to your point, they're very few and far between. Most people want the same core values, you know?
And we've been trained to, I don't know, it's not just the parties, it's the media, and there's something scary on the fringes of both sides right now.
Okay, yeah. So you've been coast to coast in this country for several
Oh,
years.
yeah.
All right, what's your feeling? Obviously, you have great intuition. You read some of these polls that some Americans feel we need a civil war within our country, which is like terrifying to me, mind-blowing. But what's the feeling you get? Do you think that's what it's gonna take for us to really wake up and change our food system, change, the way the education system is going? Do you think it's
What we need is a leader. I'm reading a book right now. There's this American historian named Doris Kearns Goodwin. She has a book out right now. Well, I had been so enamored of her book. She also wrote the Lincoln book, A Team of Rivals, and she wrote this incredible book, No Ordinary Time, about Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt. And then the book I'm reading of hers now, I'm almost done, is called An Unfinished Love Story, about her marriage to a man who was very involved in JFK administration, Lyndon Johnson's administration, and Bobby Kennedy Sr.'s campaign. And when you read her books, when you look at the way who Lincoln was, who Roosevelt was, both Roosevelts for that matter, who JFK was, even who LBJ was before the Vietnam War, who Bobby Kennedy Sr. was, who Martin Luther King, these men were not bought and sold by corporate interests. And they spoke to the better angels in people. I mean, this country elected Lincoln. Hello, how bad could it be? This country elected Roosevelt. So once again, the people, but the problem now is we have this gatekeeping
Yeah.
mechanism of the political parties and the media, both of which are beholden mainly to corporate interests. That's the problem we have. And it's a big problem.
Well,
It's a big problem.
because I was gonna say, you yourself, an incredible person, and you must come across incredible men and women every day who are ready for the challenge to be president. But how do you cut through? I mean, these giant PAC money, we have just insane billionaires. We're headed to trillionaires in this country. I mean,
It's the PAC money, it's a super PAC money. It's a super PAC money, but it's also the gatekeeping of the media. Like I said, I was blacklisted on CNN this year. I was blacklisted on NMS. I mean, that to me is journalistic malpractice. I don't
yes.
see where that's any different than the Soviet Union. When people are told, you have a choice, but we're going to tell you what your choices are. 70% of the American people said they do not want a Trump-Biden rematch. The whole thing was manipulated and engineered so that we would have one.
Okay, wait. When you say that, what does that mean to people like myself that aren't in it every day? When it was manipulated,
Okay,
what
I'll
does
tell
that
you what
mean?
it means. So I had in March of last year um announced that I was running for president. I'm an FEC registered qualified candidate. Now, what is qualified? They would have you believe that machinery with their incredible manipulation of narratives would have you really, with their idea of qualified is someone qualified in their mind to perpetuate the system as it is. Or they will say that someone's not serious, because if that person's talking about the real serious things, like food that you and I were just talking about, or the fact that 39% of Americans report that they regularly skip meals in order to pay their rent, or that millions of people are selling their blood plasma to pay their rent, or that 75 to 90 million people are uninsured or underinsured, the real serious issues, they'll call the person bringing up the serious issues unserious. They'll do whatever. And then what they do is to make sure that that person, if that person who is a qualified candidate isn't on the Sunday news shows, isn't on those um uh those platforms, people don't even know they're there. And then there are other ways also, even within independent media, all kinds of ways that the situation gets engineered to peripheralize people, that the system, whatever the system is, whether it's the mainstream system, or even it can be even on the independent, it could be on the right, also on the left, when people make this decision and they start talking about person, whatever it is. So the average person doesn't know what their options are. Now, if you look at the Constitution, in order to be president, in order to be qualified to be president, the Constitution says you have to have been born here, you have to have lived here for 14 years, and you have to be 35 years or older. The Constitution does not say you had to have been a senator or a congressman or a governor or a lawyer, because the founders were actually leaving it up to every generation to determine for itself. What do you think is the skill set that is most required in a president at this time? The system would say, oh, the skill set is that you have to be one of us. And their idea of qualified, like I said, is to maintain that system. I think the skill set that's necessary at this point is someone who would know how to responsibly and wisely disrupt that system by which corporate profits are put before our safety, health, and well-being. So when you say, what's it going to take? The problem's not, we keep putting it on the people. I think the people are so ready. If you have 70% of the American people who said they didn't want a rematch, in my experience, the problem's not the people. The problem is that there's a system that has this locked up, and we have to unlock it. The abolitionists, listen, slavery was locked up, the abolitionists unlocked it. Women were institutionalized, suppressed, that was locked up. The women's suffragist movement unlocked it. The Gilded Age was locked up, the early labor organizers unlocked it, and segregation was locked up. And the civil rights movement unlocked it. We need a pro-democracy movement in our time. And every podcast that we talk about it, every election, anytime we just push against the wall, increase our understanding, share the conversation, we're pushing against a wall that I know one day will come down.
Ah, I mean, in a way, you reflecting on the presidency, do you think that's what the American people were doing the first time they elected Trump? Was they wanted someone different, they
Yeah,
just didn't realize
I do.
it'd be so
There were,
chaotic?
yeah, I do actually. I think there were two people. You go back to 2016, there were two people who said to the American people, you're right to be angry. The system is rigged against you, and your rage is legitimate. One of them meant it. It was Donald Trump who was saying that. It was Bernie Sanders who was saying that. And the difference was that Bernie meant and would have done something about it. Now, what Hillary did when she came in as the candidate, she did the same thing, making the same mistake that Biden is making now. She came in and said, let's just continue the success of the last 8 years. And millions of people said, what success? I'm drowning here. And that's why it is so unwise of the Democratic candidate right now to build a strategy on telling people that things are doing well. When you have 39% of the American people skipping meals to pay their rent, 70% of people saying they live with constant chronic economic anxiety, the majority of people living paycheck to paycheck, for the majority of Americans, things are not doing well.
I mean, look, hey, look, I mean, my husband and I are doing probably well for what people would think, but I mean, we live in Los Angeles and we can't even afford to buy a home. I mean, it's crazy.
Most can't. And one of the things that I
Like,
talk about Right. So let's talk about this, Sarah.
Yeah, I want to hear your
I
thoughts.
assume,
Truly.
I assume your husband is a young professional, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. You and your husband are who this economy should be working for. In the 1970s, I always say this at my talks, I would say, now I'm going to say to you young people here, I'm going to talk to you about a land long ago and far away. And I know it's going to sound like a fairy tale to you, but the older people in the room will affirm that what I'm saying is the truth. And that long ago, faraway land is called the 1970s. In the 1970s, the average couple could afford a house. The average couple could afford a car. The average couple could afford a yearly vacation. One salary could support a family of four. One parent could stay home to be with the kids if they chose, and they could afford to send their kids to college. There has been, however, in the last 50 years, a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from the bottom 90% of the Americans to the top, so that we now have the largest income inequality that we've had in 100 years. So a few people are doing very well. If you're in the top 20% of the American economy, you're making it pretty well.
Okay. And when you say that, what is the top 20% now? You're making over four hundred
I'm
thousand
not
a
even
year.
sure. I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure. We should look that up. I'm
I
not even
know.
sure, but I know the percentage is 20%.
Okay.
So what we're talking about is the fact that, I read this book called Gardens of Democracy. And it said that the way the economy works in America today, it's as though all the blood in your body went into one arm. Money has to circulate in a society the way blood has to circulate in the body. You have to have wealth creation opportunity circulating. So when a couple like you, if you can't afford a house, that means it's a sign of a complete collapsed middle class. I can tell just talking to you, you are productive. If you're not educated, you're certainly smart and you educated yourself. If you told me about some of your professional background, this is what people are like, people need to realize this is like something's really wrong.
Very wrong, very wrong. I mean, I look at what my parents made in the 80s and 90s. I mean, we're making 4 times that, 5 times, but it's like,
Exactly,
you
exactly. That's
we're
right. I
like,
remember speaking at Stanford and I said, even here at this elite university, even with the degree you'll get here, I know that none of you are assuming that you could afford the house that you grew up in.
okay, so what's your take right now with inflation and these home interest rates? Do you think we're headed to another subprime? It's not going to be subprime because most people I think that are in mortgages can afford them. At least that's what I read. However, once inflation goes crazy, I mean, how long can they afford that? So, where do you think we're headed with this? Do you think the feds are going to cut these interest rates? Do you think they're going to get inflation under control? What do you
Okay,
know
first of
that we
all,
don't?
to
Yeah.
some extent, inflation is cyclical. The problem is not just that inflation happens, it's that the average American can't absorb it. Now, for some of us, inflation happens, okay, I'm not going to buy this or that this month or this year, and I'll be more careful. For the majority of people, there is no wiggle room. It's the difference between feeding your children healthy food for dinner versus feeding your children breakfast cereal for dinner. It's the difference between being able to stay in your apartment versus living at least in constant fear of eviction. So that's why we need Medicare for all. That's why we need tuition-free college and tech school. That's why, both of which not only are accorded to the citizens of every other advanced democracy, but also a majority of Republicans as well as Democrats, not as big a majority, but a majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want those things. So if we have such things as, look at this one, 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt. So once again, it's not just that inflation happens, is that people can't absorb it. They can't absorb it. If I've already got my college loan debt, if I've already got my medical debt, over half of our bankruptcies are medical bankruptcies. It's the fact that people there's no cushion.
Yeah.
The majority of Americans cannot absorb an unexpected $1,000 expenditure. So if inflation happens, it's the hit that it takes. To some extent, it's cyclical. When you ask what the feds are going to do, the feds at this point will do whatever will help the ruling corporatocracy. They're not thinking about you, Sarah.
Yeah, no kidding.
They might.
I mean, aren't you blown away at this why we are doing this to our own people? But I just read in Atlanta this year alone, investment companies, groups have bought $1 billion in homes. You know,
Okay, so let's talk
really,
about that.
they really
It
want us
is,
to rent.
so what has happened? That system is soulless. It is a malevolent strain of capitalism. Now, I'm not anti-capitalist, and listen, my books have done well. I understand the high side of the free market, and I'm as appreciative of as anyone. But when capitalism was first articulated, Adam Smith, the primary architect of it, said free market capitalism cannot exist outside an ethical context. When you take a strain of capitalism and completely disconnect it from any ethical consideration, at the beginning of our conversation today, you referred to something very important, that even with this threat of a bird flu pandemic, the government can't walk in there and test. That is what has happened. Corporate profits are our new bottom line. Corporate profits devoid from any kind of government oversight now runs rampant. They don't want regulation. They want taxes slashed for them. They want to demonize unions. Their business model is to eliminate jobs so that this tiny few rise to the top. And like you said, we're going to have the first trillionaire. And so that's where we are right now. And I can't remember, what was the original question? Because I can't
Well,
remember
it
actually.
was no, it was just about I just don't understand why we're doing this to our own people because eventually our
Because our own people want, that's really the point. So after the Battle of Gettysburg,
Mm.
uh, the Battle of Gettysburg was the determining battle. At that point, it was clear to everyone the Union was going to win. Abraham Lincoln went to the battlefield. And in speaking about the men who died in that battle for the North, he said, they gave their last full measure of devotion so that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people would not perish from the earth. It's perishing now. We're a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. So when you ask, why aren't we doing this? Why are we doing this to ourselves? We aren't. The American people are not what's doing this. The system is rigged at this point to such an extent that only those with huge amounts of money can get anywhere near access to the pinnacles of power, particularly since the Citizens United decision. And the only thing that's going to break this, the only thing that's going to cut this, that's going to intervene and interrupt this pattern, is a real awakening on the part of the American people. And it has to be on the level of the primaries, because that's where they get rid of any riffraff. That's where they get rid of anybody that they feel is inconvenient to their corporate controlled system. They have ways through character assassination, through kicking you off ballots, through the money that everything costs. People have to just stop allowing ourselves to be played and wake up, because if we don't wake up, there's no one here to do this but us.
I have just two more political questions for you, and then I want to move on to your new book and all the things you've done for spiritual writing.
Thank you.
But when you were running for president, did any of these billionaires with a conscience call you and say, Marianne, like I would support you. Let me give you $100 million. Like, does anyone have a conscience out there of these people? I have this ideological dream that Elon Musk, has a conscience and believes in someone like you. Did you ever field
Well,
any of those
it's
calls?
an interesting one. Elon Musk did a Twitter Spaces with Ron DeSantis, with Bobby Kennedy, with Dean Phillips. He put out on X that I will do a Twitter Space with any of the presidential candidates. He tagged me along with everyone else. I said 2 or 3 times, I'd love to do it. Wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think there are, first of all, let me point out, when you're talking about that kind of money, like the highest amount that you can give as an individual is $3,600. Now, where people get the huge money is super PACs. And that's called dark money. No, there wasn't anybody who formed a super PAC to support me. But when, just based on everything I've said today, would you think there are corporate interests out there who are trying to support me? Now, then you ask yourself, well,
Well,
now, Biden had 148 million on hand, cash on hand. Uh, Trump, they say, has 88 million cash on hand. So when they do these fundraisers and they raise millions and millions of dollars, how do they do that if the highest individual is 36? Well, the way they do it, let's say if the president's out at a fundraiser and somebody gives $50,000 or $100,000, 3,600 would go right to his campaign, but then it goes to the parties, so the state operations and all that to keep it legal. Whereas for someone like myself,
right. Well, it's right. I mean, it's why you see what we had the mayoral race here. I mean, I think there was something like $100 million spent on advertising. It's the Democratic Party. Susan Collins
but
and Megan
Karen Bass beat, what was his name? Richard Reardon? No, Richard Reardon was
No,
mayor. I can't remember his
I
name.
know I'm drawing a blank as well. Yes, she did beat him. He's a billionaire who owns oh gosh, Dollar Rental. I know. Why is
But
it?
I heard him say some very decent things, actually.
Actually, I really liked him. He really, he's an Angelino.
Yeah.
I think he loves this city. I think he
Yeah,
really
I
wanted
felt that from him. Yes,
I felt the
not every
love.
rich person is a greedy bastard. And even if I
Right.
hadn't agreed with all his policies, I thought he was a very genuine person, and I appreciated that. I saw
Oh,
that, yeah.
so Rick Caruso. I
Yeah,
agree. I like there's something about like Rick I really like. I
yeah.
do think
I
he
think his
loves
heart
this.
was in the right place, yeah.
All right, let's talk presidential election this year and then we'll move on. Okay, so I mean, we are stuck with these two candidates. RFK Jr. has been doing fairly well, I guess, in the polls. So maybe we have three or a write-in. Okay, so who are you voting for? I mean, are you endorsing anyone? Where are you at with this?
I'm not endorsing anyone. I'm not planning to endorse anyone. I'm certainly not now. Um, I can only say what my highest guiding principle is. I'm not saying this should be anyone else's. I'm saying what mine is. I will not do anything, including my votes, that could in any way reasonably be thought to increase the possibility that Trump will become president again.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that should be other people's guiding principle, but that's mine. The more I read of what he says he wants to do as president, and I believe him, including deporting 11 million people using the National Guard. When all these undocumented people have been here for years, they don't want to live in the shadows. They're forced to live in the shadows. They contribute to the economy. They work at businesses, they have families. Can you imagine the trauma? How many little children every morning will be afraid that mommy and daddy might not be home when they get home? It's like ice on steroids. There were he to me is his policies are dangerous to our democracy. This is not a moment to be performative. It's not a moment to be checked out. It's not a moment to be symbolic for me.
Mm.
So that's what will determine my vote.
Talk to me about your new book, The Mystic Jesus, The Mind of Love. What is the book about?
Well, I have written books for years based on the principles of A Course in Miracles. So the Course in Miracles uses Christian terms, but in decidedly non-religious psychotherapeutic ways. So it's not a religion. It's a psychological mind training in the relinquishment of a thought system based on fear and the acceptance of love instead. So I got a phone call from my publisher who said the greatest interests in religious and spiritual books is in people who want to know more about Jesus, but they don't want to know about Jesus within a context of the Christian religion necessarily. And I thought, well, I understand why you called me. Because the Jesus in A Course in Miracles, of course, not being a religion, is it's like an introduction to the metaphysical Jesus. Nobody owns the sun. Nobody owns the breeze. Nobody owns the, outer space, force of nature. And many people have, so many people in this sort of, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual world over the last few years have ended up feeling like they threw away the baby with the bathwater. A lot of talk about spirituality, people want to stay away from the word God. Well, kind of get to the point, well, what are we talking about really? Because only we're talking about the use of the mind, but it's not in service to a higher love, then it's just magic. It's not miracles. So it's the Jesus devoid of institutional trappings and the metaphysics of what it means, we know that who he was 2,000 years ago, but I think many people wonder, who is he now?
Hmm.
If he lives, where does he live? Does he live in me? And if he lives in me, what does that mean? And does this give me, do I get to just lie back? Or is not discipleship a discipline where the effort and the journey is to learn to think as God thinks and love as God loves, and the miracles that ensue? So that's what the book is about.
Oh, okay. In all your years of study, do you believe there really is a heaven? I mean,
The
I've been
Course in
raised a
Miracles.
Catholic.
The,
I'm like, there is, right? I mean,
well, the
Where
course,
there is.
that's very funny. I like you. The course, the course, that was so funny. The Course in Miracles says heaven is not a condition or a place. It's an awareness of our oneness. So you said you're married, and think of, are you a mother, by the way? Do you have a child?
Yes, I have a little 3-year-old son.
Okay. When you first fell in love with your husband, and hopefully since then as well, when you held your baby in your arms, were there not moments when you said, this is heaven?
I know it. Yes.
It was.
Ah,
There
yes.
were no barriers to your experience of pure love. And it was with another human being. That's what heaven is. So the Course in Miracles says death is like we take off a suit of clothes, that the spirit is eternal, and that, so it's not about, heaven and hell aren't after we die. The heaven and hell is what the ego would make of the present mind. Just like when you're in a relationship, it's not where you go, this is hell. Yeah. This is a nightmare. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when things are working, this is heaven.
Who are some of
By
your
the way, I think it's worth noting,
tell me.
Jesus, Buddha, all of them were born thousands of years before Sigmund Freud. They didn't have the language of modern psychology. When Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world, he meant it's of the psyche. It's inside. The kingdom is within. These people weren't less sophisticated. They were actually more sophisticated when you actually get down to it. But these things are all, once again, oh, my mind, renew your mind.
So I love that. It's so freeing to, I think, to read your books because raised as a Catholic, now thankfully my parents they never believed a lot of it. They thought a lot of it was foolish, just the not eating fish on Fridays, and I know it's symbolic for a lot of people, but and they thought some of the things that priests would try to make people feel guilty about was just so foolish. So thankfully, I don't feel like I got indoctrinated, but it is hard, isn't it, for people? It's hard for me even to, I think, remove some of the guilt that religion has because really is, I'll probably offend a lot of my listeners, but a lot of religions are really businesses, aren't they? Because really what you're saying is the practice of Jesus is so internal, right? And so about love. It's free, it's everywhere, but these churches now are businesses in
Well,
some
many
ways.
of them are, but many of them aren't. It's interesting. I was telling, I think my daughter this the other day. I was walking through a church several years ago in a small village, but a beautiful big church in England. And I started having thoughts like you just said, some judgmental thoughts about organized religion. And I really felt something shoot through me. There have been millions and probably billions of people whose hearts were in the most profound connection with God, both within and outside organized religion. So we want to be really careful of the judgmental mind, even in, it's like people say, I'll say sometimes, why do you have such a problem? Somebody will really put down born again Christians, and I'll say, well, why do you have a problem with the born again Christian? And they'll say, well, they're just so judgmental.
Oh, I love that,
Right?
Marianne. Okay,
So
you
you're judging
no, you're
someone for
good. You're
being
called me.
judgmental. So it's like a Zimpact. It's like, you don't have to have an opinion about everything. That's what I've learned in my life. The universe is not waiting for your press release about every little thing. Just observe, witness, listen,
I gotta read. I
right?
can't read. I need to read more of
But
your books.
there's something else you just, thank you.
No,
There's
I
something
love it.
else you just said though. Um, oh, when I first started the Course in Miracles, because I'm Jewish, my mother had never, my mother would just say, we don't read that book, darling, we read the other one. And then that was all I ever knew. So I didn't have anything on any of these terms because I was just taught, we don't read that book, honey, we read the other one. So for me, this was all new and wonderful. It was to some of my Christian friends, it was like what's happened to you? Because they had a background in some guilt, for instance, around some of these words that I didn't. So I saw people coming from within Christianity who, when they first started reading the course, for me, it was about learning things. For a lot of people, it was about unlearning old things that, oh, I can see it completely different. It's very interesting. Everybody's life experience takes them to a different place, obviously.
Marianne, I mean, look, I have to meet you in real life at some point. I want to have dinner with you. I adore you. I truly, I cannot
Thank
say
you.
enough amazing about you.
Do you ever come back to DC?
I do, and I'll tell you, I will absolutely email your people because you're one of those people that you could just talk to for hours. You're so fascinating. I wanted to ask you too, like if you ever learned anything in working with and being on Oprah's show, like because she's so spiritual and she's transcended fame and
She gave
everything.
me my career in many ways. I am eternally grateful to her. Yeah. Oprah, what being on the Oprah show did for my career. And I've said to many people, because Return to Love would never have been the book that it became had she not opened that space for me. And I've often said, I didn't have a political Oprah. I didn't have someone to open the door. And
Yeah.
mhm,
Wow.
yeah,
Well, thank you for being on because I feel like today what you've said will give some woman or man, courage to just run for office, speak up. Like you said, I think the great part about the internet is people are becoming more engaged in our society than
yeah,
ever.
but also it's a meanness. People
Well,
are
that's
so
true.
mean today
And
too.
I don't know if they're necessarily educated, myself included, on everything. Because, like you said, we don't all need to make a press release about everything, but people are. I know it's good and bad. And the next time you and I chat, I mean, I want to hear about everybody. It's bipartisan. They want to close down Twitter if you think, or TikTok, if you think that's a good thing. Maybe that's a good thing.
No, no, you have to give people an opportunity to get information that's not from the mainstream channels and some of the manipulation of the algorithms is concerning and should be concerning to all of us. But
Marianne,
shutting it down, I don't think is the answer. Regulating, yeah. in terms of, what you can manipulate and all of that kind of stuff. These are very complicated times, and some of these issues are very gnarly.
Thank you so much. Everybody can purchase your book,
Thank you.
The Mind of Love. It's
Thank
everywhere on
you.
Amazon. You're fabulous. We'll see you soon in real life, Marianne.
Thank you. God bless you, honey. Thank you.
Dude, thank you. All right, hold on.